He protected the alien princess with his life, and now the queen won't let him go. Ethan Carter had never imagined he would be on Elira, a world far from Earth, guarding an alien princess. He had trained for many battles, but nothing in his life prepared him for the beauty and strangeness of this place. The sky was painted in shades of green and gold, and huge floating islands drifted above the cities. The people of Elira were taller than humans, with skin that shimmered slightly under the light, and eyes that seemed to see more than just the surface of things. The princess, Liara, was unlike anyone Ethan had ever met. She had long silver hair that moved like liquid when she walked, and her eyes were violet, deep and reflective. She carried herself with grace, but she was young and untested in the ways of the court and the dangers of her world. Ethan noticed the way the other guards looked at her with fear and awe. The alien guards were skilled fighters, but he could see hesitation in them. They were trained to protect, but they also feared death. Ethan did not. He was small compared to the Illyrian warriors, and his uniform was nothing like theirs. It was simple, functional, designed for Earth gravity. Yet when he moved with calm confidence. Liara had barely acknowledged him at first. She thought he was just another human, weak and expendable. She watched him quietly during the journey to the palace, seeing him stand straight even when the wind tore at the flying carpets and hovercars carrying them. He never faltered, never looked scared. She felt a strange curiosity about him, a feeling she could not name. The attack came suddenly. One moment they were moving through the city, and the next, the streets were filled with raiders. These were not normal criminals. They were large, vicious, and fast. Their teeth glimmered under the light, and their claws could rip through metal. The alien guards tried to respond, but they were slow, hesitating in fear. Some ran, others froze. Panic spread quickly, faster than the attackers. Ethan saw the danger immediately. The princess was in front, her small frame exposed. He ran toward her without thinking. He shouted at the alien guards to cover her, but they ignored him. He pushed Liara behind him just as a raider lunged. He felt the sharp claws scrape his armor and flesh. Pain shot through his body, but he barely noticed. His mind was focused on keeping the princess safe. He pushed another raider back with the butt of his rifle and rolled to block a third. The princess screamed once. She had never seen a human fight like this. She had been trained in etiquette and diplomacy, but never in battle. She watched Ethan, amazed and terrified, as he moved with speed and precision. He did not fight for glory or pride. He fought for her. Every time a raider attacked, Ethan put himself between them and the princess. He took every hit without complaining, gritting his teeth against the pain. One raider was bigger than the rest. Its claws were long and sharp. It leaped toward the princess, faster than the eye could follow. Ethan threw himself forward, catching the creature with his shoulder and twisting its momentum. The raider fell heavily to the ground, but Ethan barely had time to catch his balance. He felt blood running down his arm, his side, and even his leg. He stumbled but kept moving. Liara saw the truth then. This human was not weak. He was not ordinary. He was brave in a way no Illyrian guard had ever been. Fear did not touch him. Doubt did not touch him. He was simply focused on one thing, keeping her alive. She wanted to reach out to help, to do something, but she could not. She was frozen by shock and awe. All she could do was watch. The battle seemed endless. More raiders came, faster and stronger. Some alien guards tried to fight alongside Ethan, but their movements were hesitant. The raiders were ruthless, and they knew the guards would hesitate. Ethan shouted and guided them, telling them where to stand, when to strike. Slowly, the guards began to follow his lead, seeing the determination in him. They began to fight better, inspired by the human who refused to give up. Ethan felt exhaustion pressing down on him. Each step was harder than the last, each movement slower. He could feel his body failing, but still he fought. He could not let the princess die. He thought of his home on Earth, his family, and his friends. He thought of all the people who believed humans were weak and insignificant. He did not fight for pride or revenge. He fought for life, for duty, and for honor. The raiders began to retreat slowly. They had underestimated the human speed and the courage of one. They had expected fear and found none. They had expected surrender and found defiance. Ethan did not chase them. He had no time for victory. He looked to the princess, making sure she was unharmed. She was trembling, her eyes wide. He offered her his hand to help her up, and she took it, her small fingers barely gripping his. The city was quiet now, but the smell of smoke and blood remained. The alien guards stood around, shocked and humbled. They looked at Ethan with new eyes, respect and fear mixed together. Some muttered words of apology, others just nodded silently. They had seen a human stand where they could not, fight where they could not, and survive where many of them might have fallen. Liara could not speak at first. She only stared at him, seeing him as something more than a human, something almost unreal. She had grown up thinking her people were the strongest, the fastest, the smartest. She had believed humans were fragile and simple. All that belief shattered in a single moment, in a single act of courage. Ethan had not just saved her life. He had shown her a new truth, one she would never forget. The queen, Valmira, arrived later, called by the alarms. She saw the aftermath of the attack and the human standing quietly among the alien guards. She watched the recordings of the fight and saw everything. She saw the way he had moved, the way he had taken blows and kept moving, the way he had saved her daughter without hesitation. She frowned, her mind racing. In her world, bravery was measured by skill and rank. This human had no rank, no history, yet he had acted with courage that rivaled the greatest warriors. Ethan did not speak much. He was covered in blood and sweat, but he moved with calm. He helped Liara to her feet and walked with her back to the palace. He noticed how other humans might have panicked, but he remained composed. He did not think of glory or reward. He thought only of duty. He had done what he had to do, and he knew it was enough. As they reached the palace, Liara whispered a small thank you. Ethan smiled faintly, hiding his pain. He could feel the injuries now more clearly, but he did not complain. He knew the queen would see him soon, and he wondered what she would say. He had done what any soldier should do, but he could feel that in this world, things were different. Humans were not expected to be heroes here, and yet he had become one in a single day. The palace doors closed behind them. Ethan knew this was only the beginning. He had protected the princess once, but danger might return. The raiders were not the only threat on Elira, and the court was full of politics and ambition. He had no idea what awaited him next, but he was ready. He had made a choice the moment he stepped in front of Liara, and he would not waver. He would protect her, no matter the cost. And as Queen Valmira studied the human, she felt a mix of anger and admiration. Anger because a creature she considered weak had outshone her guards, and admiration because she had never seen loyalty like this in all her life. She would have to think carefully about what to do with him. For now, he was a hero, but the weight of his actions would not be easy to forget. Ethan lay in the medical chamber later, his body aching, his wounds treated but still painful. Liara visited him again, sitting by his side. She said nothing at first, just watched him sleep and breathe steadily. She realized that a bond had been formed, one that could not be broken by rank, species, or fear. He had risked everything for her, and she could not ignore that. The human had changed everything. He had proven that courage was not tied to size, strength, or appearance. He had shown that loyalty, honor, and determination could surpass the expectations of 1,000 years of tradition. And Liara, the princess of Elira, knew that she would never forget the human who had stood for her when everyone else had run. Ethan woke slowly in the palace medical chamber. His body ached from head to toe, and every movement sent sharp pain through his arms and legs. The wounds had been treated, but the memory of the raiders and the fight still burned in his mind. He had expected relief when he was safe, but there was none. Instead, a feeling of responsibility weighed on him. The princess had survived, yes, but danger still lurked in every shadow of the alien city. Liara entered quietly, her silver hair flowing behind her. She did not speak at first, only stood by his bedside, watching him carefully. Ethan turned his head slightly and gave a small nod, acknowledging her presence. She smiled faintly, relieved to see that he was alive. She had never met a human like him, someone so calm in the face of chaos, someone who had risked everything without a second thought. "How do you feel?" she finally asked, her voice soft. "I'm fine," Ethan said, though he knew he was not. He grimaced as he tried to sit up, but pain forced him back down. "Just tired." Liara reached out and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You saved me," she said. "I don't know how to thank you," Ethan shook his head. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it was my duty. Someone had to protect you." She looked at him, trying to understand the human logic. "Your duty, your people, they trained you for this." "Yes," Ethan replied. "We learned to protect each other, but not like this, not against creatures like that." The room grew quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of the palace's medical equipment. Liara watched him, thinking about the bravery she had witnessed. She remembered the way he had thrown himself in front of the largest raider, how he had taken every strike without flinching. She had seen alien warriors hesitate, even run, but Ethan had not. He had moved with a calm determination that was impossible to ignore. Later, the queen arrived. Valmira was tall and regal, with eyes that seemed to pierce through the truth of everything she saw. She walked into the chamber and studied Ethan carefully. He looked small and wounded, but there was a strength in his posture, in the way he met her gaze without fear. She frowned. "You are the human who saved my daughter," she said, her voice firm. "Yes, your majesty," Ethan replied. Valmira did not speak immediately. She watched the recordings of the fight again, seeing every moment in detail. She saw how the alien guards had faltered, how the raiders had almost reached the princess, and how Ethan had stood his ground, taking blow after blow. She frowned deeper. She had never seen such courage. It was not just skill, not just luck. It was loyalty, devotion, and fearlessness. "Your actions are unusual for a human," she said finally. "Most of your kind would have run or hidden. You did not. You stood alone when everyone else faltered." "Why?" Ethan looked at her simply. "Because it was the right thing to do, because someone had to protect her." The queen was silent for a long moment. She had ruled for decades and had seen many brave warriors, but she had never seen someone risk everything so willingly. There was a law on Elira, an ancient law that required repayment for life debts. If someone saved a royal, that person was owed a place of honor or service. It was rare, almost impossible, but now that law applied to Ethan. Valmira's advisors whispered among themselves. Some thought the human should be sent back to Earth immediately. Others argued that he could be useful, that his bravery might serve the Empire. Valmira did not listen to them. She only watched Ethan, thinking about what to do. She had to decide if this human would be allowed to leave, or if the life debt would bind him to the palace forever. Ethan's recovery was slow. The wounds were deep, and his body was not used to alien medicines. The palace medics worked carefully, applying healing salves and monitoring his vital signs. He spent days lying in bed, his mind restless. He thought about the princess, about the fight, and about what awaited him next. He did not know the queen's decision yet, and that uncertainty bothered him. Liara visited every day. She brought small gifts, simple things from the alien city, and sometimes she just sat quietly by his side. She spoke little of the fight, but she talked about the palace, the gardens, and the strange creatures that roamed the floating islands. Ethan listened, learning more about her world. He asked questions about the customs, the laws, and the dangers. She answered patiently, slowly beginning to trust him more with her thoughts. As the days passed, the palace began to take notice of him. The other humans who had come with him were in awe of what he had done. The alien guards watched him differently, no longer with fear or ridicule. They saw a human who had faced apex predators and survived. They whispered among themselves, calling him the one who stood, though not to his face. Some even began to follow his advice in training exercises. Queen Valmira continued to observe him. She sent messengers to ask about his behavior, his decisions, and his attitude. They reported back that he was calm, disciplined, and respectful. He did not seek attention, did not boast, and did not complain. He treated the princess with respect, neither as a child nor as a prize, but as someone he had sworn to protect. One morning, the queen summoned him to her private chamber. Ethan entered, careful not to show pain from his injuries. Valmira studied him silently, her hands folded in front of her. "You have done what no one else could," she said finally. "You have saved my daughter when all others failed. You have risked your life without hesitation." "I only did what I had to do, Your Majesty," Ethan replied simply. Valmira's eyes narrowed slightly. "The law of Elira does not allow a debt like this to be ignored. You are now bound to the royal family in service by tradition. This does not mean you are a slave. It means you are owed a place here, and your loyalty is recognized as sacred." Ethan did not respond immediately. He had expected orders, perhaps gratitude, maybe even dismissal, but not this. Being bound to the royal family was a serious matter. It meant he could not leave freely, could not return to Earth without permission. It meant that his life would be tied to the princess and the palace. "I understand," he said finally, "but I am a human. I do not belong here. I only did what was right." "And that is why you belong here," the queen said firmly. "Because you chose to act with honor, without thought of reward. Because loyalty like yours is rare, and because you have proven yourself more capable than many of my own guards." Ethan felt a mixture of pride and unease. He had wanted no reward, no recognition. He had only wanted to protect the princess. Yet now, his choice had placed him in a position he could not ignore. He was to remain in the palace at the queen's discretion until further notice. The days that followed were strange for him. He trained with alien warriors, learning their fighting styles and adapting his own. He met other palace staff, including Claire Bennett, a human translator who had lived on Elira for years, and Lucas Hart, a security officer who respected strength and skill. They treated him with cautious respect. He learned the ways of the palace, the protocols, and the expectations of service. Liara continued to visit him daily. She would sit by the training grounds, watching him move with precision and skill. Sometimes she would tease him gently, asking him to teach her human techniques. He would smile and show her, careful to keep her safe. Slowly, she began to understand him, not just as a protector, but as a person. Rumors began to spread throughout the palace and beyond. Other planets in the Empire heard whispers of a human who had stood alone against predators and saved a princess. Some were in awe, some in disbelief. Alien warriors who had once mocked humans now refused to challenge him openly. He had changed the way they saw humans, and even the queen began to realize that his presence might alter the balance of power in ways she could not yet predict. Ethan did not think about power or politics. He thought only of duty. He thought of the princess and the life he had saved. He thought of the fights to come and the threats that would not wait. He had chosen this path the moment he had stepped in front of Liara, and he would not turn away. And Queen Valmira watched him carefully. She saw the strength in his loyalty, the skill in his actions, and the courage that refused to bend. She understood that this human was no ordinary soldier. He was someone extraordinary, someone who would shape the future of her daughter and her empire in ways she could not yet see. The bond between the human and the princess was growing. It was not spoken, not yet understood fully by either of them, but it was there. It was quiet, strong, and undeniable. Ethan had changed the life of a princess, and in doing so, he had changed the palace itself. The queen knew this was only the beginning, and that the presence of one human could bring challenges and surprises that no law or tradition could predict. Ethan had been in the palace for several weeks now. His wounds had mostly healed, though his body still ached from the fight with the raiders. The princess, Liara, continued to visit him every day. Sometimes she would sit quietly, watching him train or walking with him through the palace gardens. Other times she asked him questions about Earth, about humans, and about the battles he had fought before coming to Elira. Ethan answered patiently, never hiding anything and always speaking simply and honestly. The queen, Valmira, continued to observe him closely. She had made it clear that he was bound to the royal family by the life-debt law, but she did not yet decide exactly how he would serve. She wanted to see his character, his judgment, and his loyalty in different situations before giving a formal role. To Valmira, a person's actions revealed much more than words ever could. Ethan's actions had already impressed her, but she needed more. Ethan trained daily with the palace guards. He was smaller and weaker than most Illyrian warriors, but he made up for it with strategy, speed, and focus. He studied their fighting styles, learned their weapons, and combined them with his own techniques. The alien guards watched him closely, sometimes with disbelief, sometimes with grudging respect. He did not boast or challenge them. He simply trained, observing and improving, always aware that he might be called upon again to protect the princess. Some guards still whispered behind his back. They were proud warriors who had grown up believing that humans were fragile and unskilled. To see a human surpass them in courage and tactics was difficult to accept. They would watch him train, noting every move, every decision, and comparing it to their own. Slowly, their skepticism began to fade. Some even began to ask him for advice or demonstrations. Ethan never refused, teaching quietly and carefully without arrogance. Liara grew more comfortable around him. She would sometimes spar with him lightly, learning basic defense techniques. Ethan guided her patiently, correcting her form, showing her how to anticipate attacks. She laughed when she made mistakes, but she also learned quickly. She noticed that Ethan treated her as an equal, not as a helpless princess. He never acted condescending or overprotective, even though he could easily do so. She began to admire not just his bravery, but his kindness and respect. The queen tested him in small ways. She asked him questions about tactics, about alien history, and about ethics. She observed how he spoke to others, how he treated servants, guards, and nobles. Ethan answered honestly, without fear or flattery. He did not try to impress her, he only did what he thought was right. Valmira noticed this, and a small part of her felt both respect and caution. Humans were unpredictable, and Ethan's sense of morality was unlike anything she had encountered. She was beginning to understand that his presence could change things in ways she could not control. One afternoon, the queen called Ethan to the council chamber. The room was filled with nobles, advisors, and senior guards. They all looked at him with curiosity, some with doubt. Ethan entered calmly, bowing slightly, and stood silently at attention. The queen spoke first. "This human has saved my daughter and stood where my own warriors could not," Valmira said. "He is bound to the royal family by law and he will remain here. But I want to see his judgment, his loyalty, and his courage in situations beyond the battlefield." One of the nobles, a man named Adrian Callis, spoke next. His tone was sharp and challenging. "Your Majesty, are we to accept that a human, a creature with no history in our empire, will be treated as equal to Illyrian warriors? This is unprecedented. What if his loyalty fails? What if he brings shame upon the princess?" Ethan listened quietly. He did not speak immediately. He did not need to. His calm presence spoke for itself. After a moment he said simply, "I will not fail. I will do everything I can to protect the princess and the palace. I do not ask for respect, but I will earn it with my actions." Some of the nobles murmured. Valmira nodded. She liked his answer. It was honest and firm, without arrogance or anger. She knew that a person who could speak like this after being insulted was strong in ways that went beyond physical skill. After the council, Ethan continued his training. He practiced with both alien and human techniques, learning to adapt quickly. He worked with Lucas Hart, the palace security officer who taught him more about Illyrian law and combat strategy. Lucas was skeptical at first, but he began to see Ethan's potential. "You have skill, human," Lucas said one day, "but skill alone does not protect anyone here. You need to understand the politics, the expectations, the rules of this palace. Your courage will only take you so far." Ethan nodded. He understood. Courage was necessary, but wisdom and awareness were equally important. He began to study the empire, the laws, and the factions within the court. He asked questions, observed quietly, and learned from his mistakes. He began to see how dangerous the palace could be, not from raiders or predators, but from the ambitions of those who wanted power. Liara noticed the change in him. He was not just a protector with muscles and weapons. He was becoming a strategist, someone who could think ahead, anticipate danger, and act before a threat arrived. She admired him more each day, though she did not fully understand why. His loyalty and courage had always been clear, but now she saw intelligence, patience, and careful thought. He was growing into a hero not just in battle, but in mind as well. Rumors spread across the palace and beyond. Other planets in the Empire began to hear about a human who had stood against apex predators, who had saved a princess, and who now moved through the palace with calm confidence. Some feared him, thinking his skill and loyalty could upset the balance of power. Others admired him, hoping he would be an example of courage and honor. The queen knew that his reputation was growing, and that some factions might begin to see him as a threat. One evening, Ethan walked through the palace gardens with Liara. The air was calm, and the light of the floating islands above cast long shadows across the paths. He was tired, but he did not show it. He listened as Liara spoke about the politics of her world, the pressures she faced as a princess, and the expectations of her people. He nodded, giving advice when he could, but mostly listening. He realized that protecting her was not just about fighting raiders. It was about understanding her world, the dangers hidden in the court, and the people who might wish her harm. "The palace can be dangerous," Ethan said quietly. "Not everyone will be honest, not everyone will be loyal. Some will see me as a threat because I am different, others will see me as useful. You need to be careful." Liara looked at him, her violet eyes serious. "I have learned that already," she said. "But I trust you, Ethan. You have saved me once. I know you will do it again if you have to." Ethan nodded. "I will. No matter what happens, I will protect you." As the days passed, small challenges tested Ethan's resolve. Minor attacks on the palace perimeter, suspicious behavior among the staff, and tense discussions with nobles all gave him opportunities to act. Each time, he responded with calm judgment, careful strategy, and courage. He did not act rashly, but neither did he hesitate. His actions impressed the queen and began to earn the respect of even the most skeptical nobles. Queen Valmira continued to watch him. She realized that his presence could not be ignored. A human with courage, intelligence, and loyalty was rare enough, but a human who could navigate palace politics, adapt to alien culture, and still act with honor was almost unheard of. She began to consider how he might serve not just as a protector, but as an advisor and symbol of loyalty and courage to her empire. Yet danger was always near. Some nobles whispered behind closed doors, plotting to challenge the princess or test the human. Ethan could sense it, even if he did not know the full details. He prepared quietly, training harder, observing carefully, and learning to anticipate threats before they arose. He understood that protecting the princess was not just about reacting to attacks, but about preventing them before they happened. Liara watched him and sometimes felt a quiet fear, not for herself, but for him. He faced dangers that were far greater than any human should endure. Yet she also felt pride. She realized that a human could be more than she had ever imagined, and that sometimes courage, loyalty, and honor were more powerful than strength or skill alone. And Queen Valmira watched them both. She saw the bond growing between the princess and the human. She saw the way he inspired loyalty in others, the way he acted without hesitation, and the way he adapted to her world. She understood that this human was changing the palace, changing the court, and perhaps changing the empire itself. She also understood that challenges were coming, greater than raiders or minor plots. There would be tests of loyalty, threats from within, and dangers that could not be fought with weapons alone. Ethan would have to prove himself again and again, and the queen would have to decide how far she could trust a human who had already done the impossible. But for now, Ethan stood ready. He had earned the respect of the princess, the cautious admiration of the queen, and the growing recognition of the palace guards. He had learned to navigate the dangers of the court and had begun to understand the hidden threats of the empire. And he knew deep down that no matter what came next, he would face it with the same courage that had saved the princess and changed the palace forever. The palace had grown quiet, but Ethan could feel the tension in the air. Something was wrong. The whispers of nobles, the subtle glances between advisors, and the sudden changes in the behavior of some guards all told him that a threat was brewing. He had learned to read such signs, both on Earth and here on Elira. Danger did not always announce itself with swords and claws. Sometimes it came wrapped in words, politics, and hidden motives. Liara noticed his seriousness. She had grown accustomed to seeing him calm and steady, but now she saw a quiet vigilance she had not noticed before. "Ethan, what is it?" she asked one evening as they walked through the palace corridors. "Someone is planning against you," Ethan said quietly. "I don't know all the details yet, but I can feel it. The nobles are not as loyal as they appear. Some see you as a threat to their power. If they act, it will be sudden and dangerous." Liara shivered. She had known that life in the palace was never completely safe, but hearing it from him made it real. She had trusted her guards before, but now she realized that courage alone was not enough. She needed strategy, awareness, and someone who could act decisively. Ethan was that person. The next day, Ethan began to gather information. He walked the halls quietly, observing guards and nobles, listening to conversations and noting unusual behavior. He asked careful questions of Claire Bennett, who knew the palace well, and of Lucas Hart, who was skilled in security. Together, they began to map out potential threats and identify those who might act against the princess. It was not long before Ethan discovered the first signs of a plot. A small group of nobles had been meeting in secret, speaking in hushed tones about influence, power, and the princess's inexperience. They had convinced some guards to support them, promising reward and position. Ethan knew he could not confront them directly. It would be too dangerous and could alert the others. He needed a plan that would protect the princess and reveal the conspirators without unnecessary bloodshed. He shared his findings with the queen, who listened carefully. "You understand the stakes," she said. "If this plot succeeds, it could destabilize the palace and perhaps the entire empire. You must act wisely." "I will," Ethan said simply. "We can stop them without letting the princess be harmed." He set his plan into motion. First, he increased security quietly, placing loyal guards in key positions and watching for unusual movements. Then he began to study the conspirators, learning their habits, schedules, and weaknesses. He observed them without being seen, using his human instincts and training to anticipate their next steps. One night, the conspirators attempted to act. They had planned to strike during a private ceremony in the palace, expecting minimal resistance. Ethan had already prepared. He had arranged for the loyal guards to be in position, and he had studied the layout carefully, knowing every exit, corridor, and room. He moved silently, watching the conspirators approach the princess's quarters. As they reached the door, Ethan intercepted them. He did not shout or draw attention immediately. He used strategy, blocking their path and forcing them into a confined space where their numbers were less important. They were strong, trained in combat, but they had underestimated his intelligence and speed. He moved quickly, using their own momentum against them, disarming and incapacitating them one by one. Liara, who had been hidden nearby, watched in amazement. She saw the human who had saved her from raiders now stopping palace traitors with calm skill. She realized that his bravery was not just physical, it was also mental. He could think, anticipate, and act decisively under pressure. She felt pride and relief, knowing that she was safe once again. When the last conspirator fell, Ethan secured them and sent for the queen. Valmira arrived quickly, seeing the captured nobles and the guards under Ethan's direction. She studied the scene carefully. The conspirators were unharmed but restrained. Ethan had acted without unnecessary violence, demonstrating both courage and wisdom. "You have done well," Valmira said, her voice steady. "You have protected the princess and the palace, and you have exposed traitors without shedding blood. This is skill that few possess." Ethan nodded. "It is not about skill, Your Majesty. It is about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Violence is only necessary when there is no other option." The queen smiled faintly. She could see the truth in his words and actions. The human was unlike any warrior she had known. He had courage, loyalty, and intelligence in equal measure. He had saved her daughter not just from raiders, but from the dangers of politics and ambition. She realized that keeping him at the palace was not just wise, it was necessary. After the incident, the palace began to change. Some guards who had doubted him now followed his lead willingly. Others, who had been neutral, began to watch him with respect and caution. The princess's trust in him deepened. She no longer saw him as merely a protector. She saw him as a partner in her survival, someone whose judgment she could rely upon. Ethan continued to train, study, and observe. He did not allow himself to grow proud or careless. He knew that this victory, though important, was only a small step. The palace was full of hidden dangers, and the empire itself was not always stable. He had to remain vigilant, ready to act at any moment. One afternoon, Liara came to him with a question. "Ethan," she said, "how do you remain calm when everything is dangerous? When the palace feels full of traps and plots?" Ethan looked at her quietly. "I focus on what I can control," he said. "I cannot control the actions of others, but I can control my response. I cannot stop every danger before it appears, but I can be ready for it. Fear is natural, but it cannot guide decisions. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is action despite it." Liara considered this, impressed. She realized that he was teaching her as much as protecting her. He was showing her how to think, how to act, and how to survive in a world that was often dangerous and unpredictable. The queen observed these interactions from a distance. She saw the bond growing between the princess and the human. She saw the respect, trust, and understanding forming quietly, without force. She also saw that Ethan's influence extended beyond the princess. He had begun to shape the behavior of the guards, the responses of the staff, and even the perception of the nobles. He was changing the palace in subtle but significant ways. Despite the success in stopping the conspirators, Ethan did not relax. He continued to patrol the palace quietly, watch for unusual behavior, and train relentlessly. He knew that threats could come from anywhere, from alien predators, disloyal nobles, or even foreign powers seeking advantage. He prepared for each possibility carefully, always putting the princess's safety first. One evening, a message arrived from a neighboring planet. It warned of a possible attack on the palace from outside forces, taking advantage of internal instability. Ethan studied the message carefully. The threat was serious but not immediate. He began to prepare contingency plans, organizing loyal guards, securing exits, and arranging for rapid communication with the Queen and the Princess. Liara watched him work, amazed at his foresight. She realized that bravery alone was not enough to protect her. Strategy, intelligence, and planning were just as important. Ethan had all of these qualities, and he applied them without arrogance or hesitation. She began to trust him completely, knowing that he would act wisely and decisively if danger arrived. Queen Valmira met with him privately that night. "You have done more than any Illyrian warrior could," she said. "You have protected my daughter, exposed traitors, and prepared for threats we cannot yet see. Your loyalty and skill are rare human. I am beginning to understand why keeping you here is necessary." Ethan nodded simply. "I only act to protect her, Your Majesty. That is all that matters to me." Valmira studied him quietly. She realized that the human was not just brave, he was wise, disciplined, and selfless. She understood that his presence at the palace was more than a convenience or a law-bound obligation. He had become essential. She also knew that the bond between him and the princess was growing, forming a connection that would influence the future of the palace and the empire. As the night deepened, Ethan walked the palace halls alone. He reflected on the events of the past weeks. He had faced predators, conspirators, and now the threat of external attack. Each time he had acted with calm courage, intelligence, and loyalty. He knew the challenges would continue, but he also knew that he could not waver. The princess depended on him and the queen had placed trust in him. He would face whatever came next, as he always had. And in the quiet of the palace, Liara watched him from a balcony. She saw the determination in his posture, the readiness in his eyes, and the calm in his movements. She realized that the human who had saved her once would continue to protect her, no matter the danger. She understood that some bonds, once forged in courage and loyalty, could never be broken. The palace was safe for now, but Ethan knew that danger was never truly gone. He had prepared, he had planned, and he had acted decisively. He had proven that courage, intelligence, and loyalty were more powerful than fear or strength alone. And he knew that, no matter what came next, he would stand before any threat, ready to protect the princess. And the palace with his life. The palace had grown calmer in the weeks after the failed conspiracy, but Ethan knew better than to trust complete peace. Threats came in many forms: hidden plots, external attacks, and even the shifting loyalties of those who pretended to serve the princess. He spent his days training, planning, and watching carefully. His body was stronger now, his wounds fully healed, but his mind was sharper than ever. He could anticipate danger before it arrived, and he could act decisively when it did. Liara spent more time with him now, walking the gardens, visiting the training grounds, and studying his methods. She learned from him not only how to defend herself physically, but also how to think strategically. She asked questions, observed his decisions, and began to understand the palace in ways she had never before. Ethan never treated her as weak. He treated her as a partner in her own protection. She began to see him not just as her guardian but as a guide, someone she could rely upon completely. The queen observed all of this with quiet attention. Valmira had spent decades ruling her empire, judging warriors and nobles alike. She had never encountered anyone like Ethan. He was human, small and different, yet his courage, loyalty, intelligence, and calm had changed the palace. He had defended the princess from raiders, exposed traitors, and planned for future attacks without arrogance or pride. She realized that keeping him at the palace was not just a law-bound obligation, it was a necessity for the safety and stability of her family and empire. One morning, Valmira summoned Ethan to the council chamber. The room was quiet, the nobles waiting. Some looked nervous, some curious, all watching the human who had saved the princess multiple times. Ethan entered calmly and stood at attention, his posture steady, his expression unreadable. "Ethan Carter," the Queen began, her voice firm, "you have acted with courage, intelligence, and loyalty beyond what any of my guards could achieve. You have protected my daughter and this palace not only from enemies outside but from threats within. Your actions have proven your worth. Now it is time to make your place here official." Ethan listened quietly. He had expected to remain in service by law, but he had not known what the Queen intended. He waited, calm and ready. "You may return to your people," Valmira continued, "but I cannot allow you to leave without formal acknowledgement. You will remain bound to the royal family as an honored protector. This grants you freedom, status, and a permanent place beside the princess. You may act with your judgment and serve as you see fit to protect her and the palace." Ethan's mind worked quickly. He understood the implications. He could not leave entirely, yet he was given respect, authority, and recognition. He could act to protect the princess openly, with the Queen's backing, without fear of interference. This was more than he had hoped for. It was not just a law, it was trust, and trust was far more powerful than orders. "I accept," he said finally, his voice calm. "Not for power or reward, but because protecting her is my duty and my choice. I will serve as protector of the princess and the palace for as long as it is needed." Valmira studied him carefully. She had expected humility, but not this quiet strength. She nodded slowly. "So it shall be. The Empire will learn that loyalty, courage, and intelligence are not bound by species. You have proven that human." The nobles whispered among themselves. Some were skeptical, but many understood that this human had earned his place through action, not words. They could not ignore his achievements nor the Queen's decision. Slowly, respect began to replace doubt in the room. Liara watched from nearby, her eyes shining. She stepped forward and bowed slightly to Ethan. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Ethan gave a small smile. "I only did what was right, and I will continue to do so." The palace felt different now. The guards who had doubted him openly began to follow his lead willingly. The staff treated him with respect. The princess's trust in him had grown into quiet confidence. He was no longer just a soldier or a visitor. He was a key part of the palace, a symbol of courage and loyalty that inspired others. Days passed, and external threats tested them again. A fleet from a neighboring planet approached, seeking advantage during what they thought was internal instability. Ethan studied the incoming forces carefully, planning strategies with Luca's heart and other loyal guards. He organized defenses, trained soldiers, and coordinated the palace's security. When the fleet attacked, they found the palace ready. Traps had been set, forces were in position, and the defenders, led by Ethan, struck with precision. The attackers were repelled quickly, suffering losses they had not expected. The palace remained safe. Liara watched him in awe. He moved calmly among soldiers, giving orders, inspiring them to act, and protecting the weak without hesitation. She realized that bravery alone was not enough to survive in her world. Strategy, intelligence, and calm under pressure were just as important, and Ethan had all of these qualities. The Queen watched from the balcony. She had never felt more confident in the protection of her daughter. The human who had once been small and quiet had grown into someone whose presence alone strengthened the palace and the empire. She understood that he had become essential, not just for Liara but for the stability of their world. After the battle, Ethan checked on the princess. She was unharmed but shaken. He reassured her quietly, speaking simply and clearly. She listened, comforted not just by his words but by the calm strength he radiated. She realized then that she could face almost any danger, so long as he was by her side. Time passed, and Ethan continued to serve. He trained, observed, and prepared for threats, but he also shared quiet moments with Liara. They walked the gardens, studied together, and sometimes just talked about life, the stars, and the worlds beyond. She learned from him and he learned from her. Their bond was quiet but deep, built on trust, respect, and the shared experiences of danger and survival. One evening, the Queen summoned Ethan privately. She looked at him with a mixture of admiration and caution. "You have done more than any Illyrian warrior," she said. "You have saved my daughter, protected the palace, and proven that humans can be more than we imagined. I am placing my full trust in you. You will remain at the palace, not just as a guardian but as an honored member of the royal household. You have earned it." Ethan bowed slightly. "I will not fail you, your majesty, and I will continue to protect the princess, no matter what happens." Valmira nodded. She had made her decision. The human would stay, not because of law alone, but because of the loyalty, courage, and wisdom he had shown. He had earned a place that could not be taken away. He had become part of the palace, part of the princess's life, and part of the empire's story. The palace changed in subtle ways. Guards became more disciplined, staff worked more closely together, and nobles began to reconsider their attitudes toward humans and outsiders. Ethan's influence, quiet but strong, shaped the palace without force or command. He led by example, showing courage, intelligence, and loyalty in every action. Liara watched him, sometimes in silence. She realized that she trusted him completely, more than anyone else in the palace. He had saved her from raiders, conspirators, and attacks, but more importantly, he had taught her to think, to plan, and to trust her own judgment with his guidance. She knew that together they could face anything. Ethan understood the responsibility he now carried. He could not leave, not entirely, but he was given freedom to act in defense of the princess and the palace. He could use his judgment, his skills, and his courage without restraint. He had become more than a soldier. He was a protector, an advisor, and a symbol of loyalty and honor. The Queen watched them both from the balcony, seeing the bond that had grown between the human and the princess. She knew that this bond would shape the future of her daughter, the palace, and perhaps the empire itself. She also knew that some humans, though small and different, could achieve greatness that rivaled the strongest Illyrian warriors. Ethan had proven that. And as the sun set over the floating islands, casting golden light across the palace, Ethan stood beside the princess. He was calm, vigilant, and ready. He had faced raiders, conspirators, and external threats, and he had prevailed. He knew that danger would come again, but he was prepared. He had chosen his path, and he would follow it without hesitation. The palace was safe, the princess was protected, and the Queen had placed her trust fully in him. Ethan Carter, the human who had risked his life without thought of reward, had become a permanent part of a world far from his own. He had proven that courage, loyalty, and intelligence were stronger than fear, stronger than prejudice, and stronger than tradition. And he would continue to protect those who depended on him, no matter the cost. Some bonds, once forged in courage and trust, could never be broken. Ethan had saved the princess, earned the Queen's respect, and won the loyalty of those around him. He had found his place in a world that was not his own, and he would remain there, steadfast, vigilant, and unwavering for as long as he was needed. And so the human who had stood alone against the raiders, who had faced conspirators, and who had planned against attacks, became more than a protector. He became a legend in the palace, a symbol of courage and loyalty, and a part of the story of Elira that would be remembered for generations to come.